Yeah, I think it's recording. Yeah.
Okay. Looks like we've got join, and we'll get started.
Looks like we have people joining us.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's 7 o'clock, so we'll probably go ahead and get started. I'm Gretchen Watko, and I would like to welcome you to this evening's Class of 2021 Parent Senior Night, webinar style. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we will start off with prayer, so please join me in praying. In the name of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Loving God, you are the giver of all we possess, the source of all of our blessings. We thank you and praise you. Thank you for the gift of our children. Help us to set boundaries for them and yet encourage them to explore. Give us the strength and courage to treat each day as a fresh start. May our children come to know you, the one true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. May your Holy Spirit help them to grow in faith, hope, and love, so they may know peace, truth, and goodness. May their ears hear your voice. May their eyes see your presence in all things. May their lips proclaim your word. May their hearts be your dwelling place. May their hands do works of charity. May their feet walk in the way of Jesus Christ, your Son, and our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. For this evening's webinar, we will be using the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, so please do not use the chat. If you have any questions, please post those to the Q&A section instead. We will do our best at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as we can with the time that we have allowed. And we will be sure to send a follow-up Q&A document so that we can make sure we answer all of your questions. So we'll send that out following this evening's presentation. We'll be posting some relevant links to also help guide you with answering any questions you might have. This session is being recorded. This is our first time doing a webinar, so please bear with us if we run into any issues, but fingers crossed that everything goes smoothly. This evening, I'm also joined by our team of 6 school counselors who you will see here listed with their alphabet assignments. This way you also can have a name with a face and recognize who your counselor is for your student. And at this time, I'm going to pass it over to Kathy Pavanka, who will be walking us through our presentation.
Good evening. As convenient as this is, I hate that we're not getting to see your faces during the month of September like we usually do. We've got a great number of you signed up, and we will be sending out a recording of this. But we kind of wanted to just get you up to speed with what we've been doing with your students here at school. Some of them may be telling you what we're doing. Some of them may have hidden everything that we've talked about or given them in their backpacks. So we want to make sure that you know kind of where we are with your students and how we're supporting them and how we're going to move forward with them. So at this point, one of the first things that we did when we all went home in March, we were trying to think of ways we could connect with your students. And that was, Google Meets and emails and all kinds of things. But in the summer, we always had our workshops where we would walk through the Common App line by line and provide information on letters of recommendation and essays and things like that. And we were not able to do that. So we developed what we call a Google Classroom. And that Google Classroom is similar to a Schoology page, but we knew that Schoology was something that they had to check in every day, every class period with, and had to submit homework and tests and quizzes. And we wanted to make sure that they had something that was kind of fresh for them in the summer that was a little different than what they had during e-learning. So the Google Classroom, we'll have a slide on it here in a minute, was a resource for them with a ton of information. So we started with that over the summer. And then after the first week and a half or so of class, we were able to make our way into resource classrooms. And during COVID, that was no small feat because they are spread out everywhere. But we were able to present to all the students during their resource periods. For those that didn't have a resource, we offered before and after school sessions that they could come in, and for those that were virtual or ill during the time that they would have come in, we also did a voiceover presentation, which you would have been copied on at the end of August to accommodate those students. And that presentation covered a lot of what I call the nuts and bolts of the application process: how to request a transcript, how to request a letter of recommendation, how to match your Common App in Naviance so that we can send materials, how to add your counselor as an advisor, things like that. So a lot of detail was in that presentation just to kind of get them going on the process. We also have started our individual meetings. For the last few weeks, we've started meeting with seniors. They would have received an email from their counselor inviting them to an individual meeting. And I have to say, I think we're having a lot of fun with these meetings. We're going over and making sure that the college list they talked about in the spring, is it the same? Do we need to regroup and do new research? Where are they with their applications and their testing and their essays? And there's a whole checklist. And I think most of us are using at least some version of the same checklist and sending copies of it home. So hopefully some of them are getting out of trouble by showing all the check marks they have on their to-do lists. And we have kind of some follow-up of what they need to be working on. I always tell the students, and I think the other counselors do as well, that this isn't a one and done kind of thing. It's not like I had my meeting with my counselor and now I'm on my own. We are going to be there throughout the semester, throughout the entire year, because there's different things that happen second semester, and meeting with them and making sure that they are all set and have all their questions answered. We will continue those meetings. Like I said, encourage your students to ask for help. A lot of them think that their questions are stupid or bad and they feel silly asking them. There are no such things. This is a very stressful time for students. We want to make sure that they get all their questions answered. A lot of times we won't know that they have a question unless they ask us. So we may think that they're understanding everything, but encourage them to come and see us. Our doors are always open. If the student's counselor has a closed door with a student and having a meeting, have them check with another counselor if they have a question they need answered. We're all willing to help all the students in the class. So feel free to have them stop by and encourage them. The students also have been asked to add us as an advisor on their Common application. It allows us to see their progress, see what, well, maybe there's a mistake on their application. I've already found a few punctuation and spelling errors, or they missed something that they should have added in. And we are more than happy to look over those applications and see what it looks like. They're typing into boxes. So a lot of times pulling it up as a PDF and going through it with a student allows us to help them read over their essays and check over the application, make sure it's as polished as possible. Typically at the start of the year when we do our application kickoff, we get the opportunity to have English teachers come in, and we do an August 1st workshop, and the English teachers are helping with essays and things like that. And we haven't had that opportunity due to the pandemic. So make sure your students are having their favorite English teacher or their favorite teacher, because there's a lot of teachers here at school other than English teachers that are great at reading essays as well. The counselors can read essays. They also wrote one in their composition class. I found that some students have completely trashed that essay and started with something new because they had something new happen since they took the class that they wanted to write about, and other students who have perfected the one they have and are very excited to use it and have feel like it's still relevant to them. So definitely use the resources here at school. We've got amazing teachers who are more than happy to help with that, as well as the counselors. Parent support, and this is my this bullet point is specifically for me, because I did this 2 years. I wasn't good at this 2 years ago. Help your students, but let them take the lead. It's really a great time to have them learn how to advocate for themselves and take on the responsibility of their college applications, their scholarship applications. They definitely will need your help, but let them kind of take the lead on it and kind of guide from behind. Like I said, I could have been better at this as a parent. So I think those of us that have gone through this process probably all can think of things that we would have done a little differently. The parent brag sheet. If you haven't done this, and I know that the counselors can put a link, I think, in the chat to that. I think I've got a little quick link there for you. The parent brag sheet, if you haven't done one, we would still love to have one. I think if you could get it in this week, we've started kind of writing letters and moving forward with that. So we would like it pretty soon so that we can use some of the information you gave us as kind of a think tank for us. I love some of the descriptors that you give and some of the stories that you tell, things that the students won't brag about on themselves. So we would love that. And I think one of the big things parents can help support is making sure that the students are meeting their deadlines and have a plan in place for those deadlines. A lot of the first deadlines are going to be November 1st. There's just a handful that might be, October 15th, not very many. But that's going to come up on us pretty quick, and we definitely don't want them to wait till the last minute. So what should seniors be doing right now, kind of as an overview? For most of them, they're still working on their applications, whether it's the Common App or the institutional app. If the school isn't a Common App school and they're doing one directly from the institution, those take some time. They're not super difficult to fill in demographics, but they definitely need to be working on those and starting to kind of chip away at the pieces. They need to be working on their essays. Several of the students that I've met with thought they were done with because they had their Common App essay done, and then we looked at their schools, and some of the schools have supplement essays. So make sure that they know what essays they're working on. Testing piece, we'll have a whole slide on this in just a minute. Testing is kind of the piece that is very strange this year, and there's a lot of very individual conversations about testing, which ones to take off and to take them with the limited time that we've got, and whether to send them or not to send them, depending on the school. It's going to be a very individual conversation with the student. Making sure that they're requesting their transcripts and letters of recommendation and Naviance. I think every counselor on the screen today can attest that we've probably told students more than once how to do this, because it's not hard, but it's not something they do every day. So we want to make sure that they can do that. And if they haven't scheduled a meeting with their counselor, they should do that immediately, right away. I know that in the next few weeks, we're going to be trying to wrap these up. Some of us are already, they had the chance to pick a time, and I think some of us are getting ready to assign times or send out emails to remind them to pick a time. So make sure that your child has had scheduled a meeting or is in the works of having their meeting here very soon. In terms of resources, we kind of wanted to go over a little bit about what is available to your student. We mentioned that Google Classroom. The Google Classroom is pretty awesome. I think we just have a handful of students who have not accepted their invitation for that. So that might be a question to ask your seniors if they have joined the Google Classroom, which we have renamed the 12th grade college counseling curriculum. It has videos, it has worksheets, it has documents, it has announcements on it. We have videos about just about every facet of Naviance. We have videos for every section of the Common App, going line by line through the Common App. And then we have a plethora of videos from our college admission partners that we consider dear friends. Many of them have sent us videos on visits and essays and tips for applying, things like that. So make sure your students using that resource. There's a great amount of information out there that they can use. We also are using Remind. I know that not every one of the seniors has joined their counselor's Remind group, but it is a way for us to get in touch with students with quick announcements. It's kind of the way to use text without using individual texting pieces. So we're not really supposed to email or text students individually for safety precautions. So this is a way to use that. I know a lot of teachers used it last year when we were on e-learning. So we would love for all students to be on Remind so they can get reminders and announcements from their counselor. Naviance, hopefully your students have used Naviance through their 4 years here. There's a lot of wonderful opportunities in Naviance, from career exploration to college research. They've used it in their composition classes. They've used it in their religion classes. Senior year, it is a must-have. That is the only way they can request transcripts and letters of recommendation. We do not accept email requests. So if a student were to email counselor and say, can you send my transcript to such and such school, we would say, go to Naviance and request. And like I said, we'll help them. Some of them even ask 2 and 3 times, where do I go for that? And we'll show them, and they pretty much have it down pat. A lot of them do right now. This is where they're also going to request those teacher letters of recommendation. They don't have to officially request a counselor one. In our discussions with them, we're asking for some things, but they do have to ask the teacher in person, and then they add them in Naviance so that the teacher can upload their letter and send. We really caution students, if you only need 1 letter, if you only need 2 letters for the colleges on your list, don't ask 5 teachers because a few of those teachers will not be able to send, and they've spent time to write that letter that will go nowhere. So make sure your student's only asking for the number that they need. The counselor letter, like I said, when we meet with the students, we kind of talk through what we'll need. They have a survey in Naviance that they have been assigned, so it pops up pretty readily. We also need a resume, and that can be the resume in Naviance if they did one there, or a hard copy or an emailed copy. And then like I said, we would love a parent brag sheet. And I know quite a few of you have already done that, but we want to make sure that if you are interested in sending one to us, that we have that. Testing, here's the fun slide. I think we all kind of cringe when we hear this word. We still have students that are taking tests. We have the October one this Saturday here at Cathedral. And Mr. Kirkwood has done and Mrs. Brandis, who are doing our SAT and ACT. We've tried to offer some things in the fall, which has not been the case in the past, to make sure students have an opportunity to take those tests. We do recommend that your student has a test score, just to kind of be on the safe side. If there is a program or scholarship or school that is not on that huge test optional list now, that they have a score available. We have some students that have taken both, some that have taken one or the other. There still is some time to get a test score in. There's a lot of gray area, as I like to say, in the test optional test blind situation. I know that some of you had posted some questions on our Google form, our pre-webinar question form regarding how do we know if we should send test scores or not? What's the cutoff for some of the schools? There's no clear-cut answer for that. We have been talking this over with students and parents over the last several weeks. It kind of depends. There are going to be some students that applying test optionals benefit to them. Maybe they have very strong transcript, but their test scores are not quite where the school would want them that they're applying to. Other students, it might be that they have a great test score and maybe they haven't been as strong academically on their transcript, and it can help bolster their application. It's very, very specific to each school and each student. So we definitely want to continue to have those discussions with you and your child because the colleges are not going to give a clear-cut answer. It might be that you apply for a school and you've got a great test score and it would work for admission, but if you submit it, it may not help you with the scholarship piece. Test blind schools, those are kind of amazing schools because they're not going to look at it either way. You could send a score or not send a score, and they're not going to use it at all. Probably One that would come to mind would be Marion. Marion is test blind this year, so they're not even going to consider it for scholarship, admission, programs, anything. So there are different schools that are going to have kind of a different feel on that. The one thing we've asked the students to do is kind of take it, there's another layer this year, and for some of us in the office that we've done this for a very, very long time, we feel like newbies kind of for this year. I know Mr. Kirkwood and I were just talking about that. We both have been around, 30 years, and this is very different. So we want to make sure we add that extra layer of looking at what test optional means at the schools. So have your student get on their websites of the schools and look up, is it test score across the board, whether it's scholarship, certain programs, admission, or is there some fine print? You notice I put that little bitty tiny print on the screen. Read the fine print. Make sure if a school has a test optional policy, maybe their nursing program requires a test score, or their engineering program, or their honors program, or you need it for scholarship. Just make sure you know kind of what the bottom line is. If a school is needing a test score, or you plan to send it, there's a couple ways. There are some schools that will take self-reported test scores on the applications, and some will want it specifically from the testing agency, which means going into the College Board website or the ACT website, or you do get 4 free score reports with every test, but those expire after so many days after the test is done. So you may pay $12 or $13, but they do not come from our transcripts. They do not come from Purdue allows self-reported. Last year, Notre Dame allowed self-reported. And then there's some schools that are jumping on that bandwagon today as well. All right, and testing, we may have that discussion later in some questions, I'm sure. In terms of scholarships, an email went out just a little while ago with some scholarship and financial aid information. We will put any scholarship that crosses our path in the office, local, regional, national, we'll put in the Naviance scholarship list. There's also a national scholarship match on Naviance that students can use to match scholarships. We've also listed on our website, as well as on that email, many of the scholarship websites that might be helpful to your student, whether it's FastWeb or Unigo or College Board. There's a lot of different scholarship search sites. We definitely will help students, provide them the tools to do the searches. And there are also some that we do nominations for. Part of that email that went out today was the nomination process for the Wells Scholarship at IU, which is one of their top academic scholarships for students with very high criteria. And if your student fits that, make sure that they put that in, because we have to do a nomination process for some scholarships. So we always tell the students to kind of start with the school when they're looking for scholarships. You're going to have automatic scholarships that students will be considered for at a lot of schools, but there may be additional scholarships on their scholarship and financial aid pages. And we always encourage students to go out and research those. There could be specific scholarships for the major. There could be scholarships for service or leadership, things like that. So it will always behoove a student to go out and look that information up and see if there's some additional scholarship opportunities. We also want them to look for some of those outside ones, and we will always put the tools in their hands. We won't do the search for them, but we'll make sure they have all the tools, and we can talk through any scholarship opportunities they found. Sometimes they're a little questionable if it's just submitting an email for a drawing or something, but some are pretty very valid scholarships out there that the students can look for. Please don't ever pay for a scholarship search service. Somebody may say, if you pay us $100, we'll do all these scholarship searches. And you definitely want to not pay for any of that. Everything is out there. It's all free. It's all for the taking. We will definitely help guide your students. And this is my soapbox talk every year. Do not wait till spring to look for scholarships. It seems to happen every year where students come running in after they got their financial aid package, and they want to find more scholarship money, but there were some really great opportunities available in the fall that they missed out on. So the sooner they get those applications done, the sooner they can start doing some scholarship searches. And I know parents that you guys have every indication that they're going to be doing some scholarship searches, because if you don't have to pay for it, don't, right? Okay. This week, a big week because the FAFSA will open. I know that we did have some questions on our Google form about if you are sure that you won't qualify, should you go ahead and apply for the FAFSA? Absolutely. We encourage all families to fill out the FAFSA. Mainly the reason is once it's on file, if for some reason your financial situation changes, you have it filed, you can revisit that with the college that your student's attending. And to be honest, in this day and age with the pandemic, I would rather have that safety net out there for sure. Also, students can qualify for some of the basic scholarship opportunities, subsidized and unsubsidized scholarships, not scholarships, loans. I shouldn't say scholarships, it's loans. So if you want every opportunity, definitely make sure. And keep an eye on your school's requirements. There are some schools that require the FAFSA in order to earn an academic scholarship or leadership scholarship. So make sure that you know what their criteria is and what their expectations are at each school. We also have these wonderful copies from Invest Ed, and there's a picture there on the screen. Some of us had some meetings with some seniors before we got these brochures. So if your student does not have one, we have plenty. Mrs. Brandis procured those for us. And there's also in the email that you received today, and we will send out another link. If we get it into the chat, that would be awesome. The financial aid presentation. Our goal was to have a live financial aid night in the middle of this month. And obviously we aren't able to do that live. So InvestEd, who is going to be our presenter, they're a wonderful partner for us, has offered to make us a video, and there's about a 40-minute video in that link in that email that you can view that gives a great overview of financial aid and what we need to be doing to fill out the FAFSA and taking the best advantage that you can of any aid that's available. But it's starting October 1st, and you will use your 2019 taxes. It's called prior year. So they use the taxes from 2019 to determine financial aid for your son or daughter's freshman year. Okay, let's talk about college visits for a minute. Obviously, there are some campuses that are not open for visits right now. They're still trying to maneuver their own population on campus. Some of the smaller liberal arts schools are hosting some limited visits. They only take so many a day, and there's only certain things they can show. But definitely check the list for your son or daughter. I know a few students that have gone on some visits and had really good visits. Everybody gets 2 college visit days that are excused and don't count against those personal days that you get every semester. What we like, it's a pretty simple process. Parents need to make sure they call the absence in. And then we ask when you're on the campus is ask the admission office or the coach, or if it was a special visitation program, ask them for documentation that you were on campus. And then you turn that into, I say the front office on this slide, but it's really student services office, to Mrs. Magruder, and then she will mark that as a college day. If you don't turn in the form, then it will just stay a personal day. We have a great opportunity for juniors and seniors to visit virtually here at school with some representatives. We've had to kind of change up our program a little bit this year since they can't come on campus and many of them are not traveling anyway. But students can sign up via Naviance. We still have visits through about the first week of November. We allow 15 students. We were very blessed this spring without even realizing how important it could be. We received a TV for our outer area from the Mothers Club. So thank you, Mothers Club. So that we can actually spread our students out now and have about 15 students spots available. We are recording these sessions. So we post those out on the counseling website. It's under our trending topics page, which is right front and center on our counseling webpage on the Go Cathedral webpage, where we're recording them. So whether seniors watch it or freshmen watch it or students in between, that's one of the silver linings, I guess you could say, is we do have those up on the website for all students to watch. And even if a student didn't sign up, we recorded a short overview of that school for you. But encourage your students to sign up. It would be great if they have a really significant school on their list and they're coming for a visit in the next few weeks. Sometimes it's a one-on-one. Sometimes there's just a few students in there. They can ask their specific questions, meet the person that could be reading their application. So it is kind of important. There are tons and tons of virtual opportunities out there. We have a lot of them on our trending topics page. We've sent out emails about them. We've had several virtual college fairs. The Jesuit one was this week. We had one last week. Actually, Jesuit one was this week. Last week, we had the North Side one with about 100 schools. And the HBCU one is at the end of this week. A lot of opportunities. Colleges are pulling out all the stops to do information sessions, individual meetings. They do some tours where you can actually, some of them you can walk around with the student tour guide live and they'll show you campus. So they're doing all kinds of interesting things. So definitely take advantage of that until you can get to visit a school. I kind of played around with some screen art here. So the point of this slide, our theme is excellence this year. It takes, and I hate to say this because I made fun of it all spring when the news stations talked about we're all in this together, but we kind of are, so I'm going to use it. It takes all of us to support the students. The students are doing their part. We're trying to do our part. Parents, you are a huge part of this, and obviously our teachers. None of the students would be where they are without great teachers and great education and great opportunities in the classroom. So we're trying to all work together to make sure that in this very, very strange year, that we are supporting your students 100%. And with that, I'm going to put our contact information up here on the top of the screen. I tried to make sure we had plenty of time to answer some questions. So I'll leave the contact information up for a few minutes and then I'll pop back to the main screen. And Ms. Watko or any of the other counselors, do we have some questions that we need to answer from the Q&A?
Yes, we do. I'll read the first question and open it up for anyone to go ahead and answer. So our first question is, can the student take the SAT or ACT after the November 1st application deadline and submit those new scores? Or do they only use scores for tests taken prior to November 1?
I'll answer that if that's okay, Kathy.
Sure, absolutely.
As the SAT administrator for the school this year, each school is going to be a little different with that. To have a complete application in the past, they needed the application, the transcript, and the test scores. With it being a test optional year, colleges are not requiring that test in many cases. Some of the colleges are saying we need a score by November 1st to consider you, and then you can submit scores after November 1st for sometimes for reconsideration for scholarships and some other opportunities. But if you went test optional, some schools are not allowing you to submit a test score if that was a choice you made. So it really depends. But the good news is Indiana University Bloomington, for example, if a student were to go test optional and then they take the December SAT and they get a very high score and want to submit that for consideration for their academic scholarships, as long as they receive the test scores by January 15th, Indiana University would reevaluate their scholarship determination and maybe award them something with that. So it really does depend. And if a student is working for a particular school that has a pretty high standard and they're trying to improve their scores, we can talk with them individually about the strategies behind that. And if they want to do some test prep and maybe try to improve a score to prove that they would be admissible, we certainly would work with them on that.
Great answer. I saw one on here about the Google Classroom and whether parents have access. At this time, no. We are working on trying to figure out through our Google Administrator how we can add the Guardian feature. Right now, that is not an option that we do have on there, but that might be a perfect time to and usually this is my favorite meeting, because if we're talking to 150 of you, you all go home and I get stories the next day about how you interrupted their studying because you wanted to talk about college admission stuff. So feel free to go knock on their door when we're done and have them show you the Google Classroom. Hopefully at some point we can do that. We're still trying to figure out how we would do that.
Wonderful. So there's another question that is a little bit of a piggyback or follow up to what we were just talking about with test optional and submitting test scores after November 1st. So there's another question, and that is, the deadline for applications is November 1st, but what are the deadlines for things such as transcripts, test scores, letters of recommendations, etc.?
The test scores point I made with the November 1st, the deadline for every college is going to be different, and that's where we need the students to really do their homework. I think Ms. Pavanka spoke briefly about the different admission options that students have with early action, early decision, regular decision, enrollment admission. So each of those are going to be a little different for every college, and the students really need to know what those are. When a college has a deadline, they typically want the student to have their transcript and their application completed and submitted by that date to be fully considered. And as I said earlier, in the past, the test scores would have been needed by that date as well. There are regular decision deadlines. A lot of the schools, they might have early action November 1st, but their regular decision isn't until January 15th. So students certainly can apply after November 1st, but they might miss out on important opportunities for competitive majors, for scholarship opportunities, for some other things like that. So we really recommend students look at the deadlines, and if they have everything ready and they have their best application available, to try and get that in for those November 1st early action deadlines. But they can submit things after that, but to have a complete application, whatever is asked for needs to be in by those deadline dates. There is some leeway sometimes on the counselor letter of recommendations, teacher letter of recommendations, if for some reason those were missed. We could sometimes work with the college representatives and submit those after the deadline, but if the student failed to turn in their application and those deadlines have passed, they're not going to give them much forgiveness for that.
And there are a couple colleges that will say this is the deadline, but counselor and teacher materials need to be in by this date, but not very many. We watch those deadlines very, very carefully.
And something that we're all doing as we're having our individual meetings with our students is we're making sure that they are selecting the corresponding deadline in the Common App application as they're completing that, and also in Naviance. So we're checking with the student to see what, what application deadline they are pursuing, and then reviewing that with them as well. The Common App will have a little bit of information for each school about what is due by that deadline, but it really is important for the students to also be going to the school's website to be checking those deadline dates.
And I see Beth Brandis is on. Beth, can you give us a little bit of overview of what InvestEd is? I think she's on, maybe. Maybe not. I'll take that one then. I think she's trying to be in transit and be online at the same time with their children stuff. Oh, is that her? Beth, you on there? InvestEd is actually a company here in Indiana that actually provides a lot of not-for-profit types of services to schools. I think that probably the majority of the schools in this area and outside of this area in the state of Indiana are using something from InvestEd in terms of financial aid, advice, things like that. So it's a free service for us. They have been a great partner for us. They don't typically, they're not trying to get your business as a financial plan or anything like that. They are definitely not for profit and here to support students in the financial aid process. Okay. I have a question about the virtual visits. You
Yeah,
want me to take that one?
I can start that. It looked like
Okay.
Beth was, I could see she was trying to connect
Okay.
with audio, but wasn't able to connect, it looks like. So
Okay.
I'll start with that, and then Kathy, you can
Sure.
join in, or anybody else can join in with more. So the question is, why are virtual tours limited to 15 students? Can't they be done via Zoom or similar so any number can attend from wherever they want? This is a good question, and I'm assuming that this is actually referring to our virtual college rep visits here on campus. So with that assumption in mind, I'll answer that as such. So in the past, in a typical normal year, not a COVID year, we would have college reps visiting our campus every single day. But because we cannot have the college reps on campus, and because every single college is operating a little bit differently right now in that regard, all of the college representatives are making themselves available virtually, similar to what we're actually doing this evening. And so to still make it personal and also provide students the opportunity to have direct one-on-one contact with the college rep visits, we've been hosting those college rep virtual visits here in our counseling department office in our sitting area. We have a big TV that Kathy applied for through the Mothers Club grant that we were awarded, and very honored to have. It's come in very handy this year. So we are able to have our college rep visit live with us on that big screen. They go through their presentation, and then the students who are here get to speak live with that college rep and ask questions and get questions answered. So that's why it's limited to 15, because our area, in order to safely be 6 feet apart, we can only have 15 students in here at one time. However, we are recording the sessions and providing a link to those recordings on our website, which I put a link to that. It's on the trending topics page, and I put a link to the trending topics page in the chat on the webinar here. So hopefully that answers your question, or anybody's question about that. But Kathy, if I left anything out, go ahead.
Well, I think the key is any number could attend, but they would be missing class, and they can't really watch in class, and we can't have them in here. So that's why, it's limited, and they can't be watching sitting in a classroom. So the recordings have been real helpful, but I would add that if sit down with your student, have them get on Naviance and look through the upcoming visits. We showed them where to go to look for those, and look and see if any of those schools are coming, because the students, and this is kind of even if when they were live, the students don't take as much of advantage as those as they could. So if you see that they have a school, there's a school coming up that's pretty high on your students list, I would encourage them, because they don't even take the whole period anymore because they're virtual. So a student could come down and meet somebody that could be the person making the decision on their application.
I see the next question there was about early action versus early decision, and
I
I
knew you'd
spoke
take that.
briefly about that earlier, but the colleges offer these different admission types for different reasons. The early action is simply going to allow a student to hear an answer back from that college sooner than they would if they applied for the regular decision option. And a good example of that is if you apply by November 1st, you'll hear by Christmas at Notre Dame. If you wait for the regular decision, I believe the deadline, Kathy, is around January 15th or January 1st. I don't want to miss
December 31st.
December 31st.
Yeah.
Right.
It's moved since you
until March or April for your answer on that. The early decision is a very important one to understand. Decision means you're deciding that's where you want to go. And if a student opts for that on the application process, it'll require a parent and the counselor to sign off on that, because that is committing them to attend that university if they were to be admitted. It's a way for the colleges to really know that they've got a very committed student. I kind of say a bird in the hand is better than two in the bush. They know they have that student, So they will sometimes make those offers to students, and the statistics are sometimes a little bit more in the favor of a student. They might be 12%, 4% a regular decision, as an example, and not but close. So the early decision, the student can only choose one college to do that to. And if they were admitted to that college, they would be required to remove all of their applications, not hear any decisions, and also not hear about any financial or scholarship opportunities. So that's a big difference between the early action and early decision.
I'll jump in on this FAFSA question. The FAFSA is never completely required, but there would be some schools that may want a FAFSA for scholarship consideration. It's not that many, but sometimes the FAFSA will be required to get scholarship money. Like I said, I always encourage families to do it because if, you know, especially with the pandemic, if something happens to someone's income, then you want to make sure that that you've got your bases covered. Loans are done through that. So we highly encourage it, but we don't have to, you don't have to do it, but make sure you're not missing out on opportunities. Okay.
I see a question about what are we hearing from college on the application for this year? Are there less out-of-state or international applicants? It really is unknown territory this year. We were just talking, or Ms. Bavanka was, to a number of college counselors in the area about the number of applicants to some of our local colleges, and they are saying they are actually down on applications significantly this time of year compared to last year. It really is an unknown. I think colleges are just as nervous as we all are, and the students are. You know, we are normally recommending students apply to 3 to 8 colleges, and looking at that, having maybe their stretch schools that are realistic and as fallback as one from each category to make sure they have options. I think this year we might see students apply to more than that just because they don't know what's going to happen, both financially and just with the pandemic. So it is definitely an unknown. And then with the schools going test optional, how are they going to review 40,000 applications at a state university and make those tough decisions for the engineering programs? So it's a really unknown area. I would just encourage students and parents to kind of go about this process very thoughtfully, really think about those different categories I spoke to, make sure your students have some in each category. As I said, you know, you never know what's going to happen. Who would have predicted a pandemic? And, you know, do you want to send your child across the country if that's still going on in the fall next year? So making sure those students have some different options would be a high recommendation, and have those fallback schools that maybe we want to stay home and attend a local state school for that first year next year. So wish I could tell you more. We're learning every day what's happening. Ms. Bavanka might have a few other thoughts to add to that.
Yeah, there was a related question. You covered most of it, I think, on will things be more competitive due to COVID? And like that's still an unknown. We don't know, you know, if you're test optional at IU and you don't submit a test score, are you more competitive for scholarships or not? Or, you know, we haven't seen any results come in. I think that schools are scared enough right now to make their numbers that I think we're going to see some of the things we saw last spring in terms of being overly cautious, admitting more students just in case. And there was a question that just came in, our first fewer freshman spots open due to deferrals from last year. I don't know how many, we all attended so many webinars between March and August and are still attending them today. They are just coming at us like crazy. Last spring, you know, when I was hitting some of those webinars up in May and June, the colleges weren't getting as many deferrals as a lot of people think they were. They weren't over the top asking to defer for a year. They'd have a handful, maybe a few more than last year. So I don't know that, and it kind of depends on the school with that one and kind of what situation they were in, whether or not students going in a year. And those students might go to different schools even. They might have deferred and they might end up wanting to go somewhere else. So I don't think there'll be fewer freshman spots. It could vary from school to school, but I don't think it's going to be the big issue a lot of people were worried that it was going to be.
Another question I see here, will schools require students to submit semester 1 and semester 2 grades, and how does that process work? And then I saw an earlier question, I think it moved out, but how does students get their transcripts and forms through Naviance to Common App? The counselors handle the forms and the transcripts, and we'll push those out for our students, and the students can see when that's been done in their Navient accounts. That would be the transcripts and the secondary school reports. If a student is applying now, we're going to send their 6th semester grade through their junior year, and that's what colleges will review. With that early action process, there's 3 outcomes that could happen with that. They could deny the student, they could admit the student, or they could defer the student. If they defer the student to the regular decision, they would probably ask the student to produce a transcript for 1st semester grades so they could reevaluate the student if there were some concerns about grade trends, see how they perform in maybe their higher level math classes. So if a student gets an email saying they were deferred or they applied regular decision, they're still asking for that 1st semester grade or mid-year report is what that's called. The student would need to go into their Navient account and request a new transcript, not the initial that they did the original time, but their mid-year report and mid-year transcript, and then we would be notified to send that out to the college, depending upon how that goes.
And we'll send a reminder and instructions on how to do that when we get closer. But I think the big thing to tell your senior is grade senior year will matter, because we will send a final transcript to the school of their choice. And if they're not keeping above board as they have been, we haven't had very many nightmare situations, but we have had a couple where the student was an AB student. They got in 1st semester early and were like, fine, I'm done, and started getting C's and D's, and that college notified them in July that they weren't coming in anymore because they didn't quite live up to their end of the deal. So like I said, that's very rare, but feel free to put the fear of God into them if you would like to. So. All right, looks like we've got, does anybody want to handle that last question in there? I think we got a couple in the chat as well.
There's another question asking, are parents allowed to attend the meeting between the student and the counselor? Yes, definitely parents are welcome to attend. We're not going to turn you away. However, our goal for our meetings with individual meetings with our students is to really put them in the driver's seat and give them the tools and the resources and the avenues that they need to make good decisions about the application process and know how to navigate the application process. So certainly if you want to attend, you're more than welcome to. However, we really want the students to be taking this initiative and taking on this responsibility and taking ownership for this ultimate decision that they are going to make for their next chapter in their life.
Oh, go ahead.
A follow-up point to that, though, if parents have questions or concerns and want to kind of know what was said, we certainly welcome that. We are providing that copy of the checklist to the students with some notations on that might be useful to see. But certainly if you have a question or concern, call us, email us probably is the best way to initiate that. And we will certainly follow up with you and let you know about it. But a parent of 3 children that have gone through this process, the one that didn't take the initiative, I could tell you it didn't work out so well. So learning to stand in line and ask for help from the professors and having that self-advocacy skill is certainly something that I highly recommend. And I think you'll want them to have that once they head off to college and they're on their own with all those decisions.
And most students will have, and we strongly encourage this, and I'm finding that most students are doing this, they'll have a folder or binder or something where they're keeping all of the copies of things that we're providing them. So following this presentation, we do encourage you to ask your student questions, sit down, and we encourage our students to sit down with their parents and their guardians at home to go over the checklist, review some important information, and have those conversations at home as well, because they're going to need you as their parents and guardians to help guide them in their decisions too.
Well, and I don't think I've had one student that's left my office that didn't feel better because they saw more check marks than they thought they were going to have. And I think a couple of them even mentioned they might not be grounded for the weekend if they take that home because it looks like they did some work. There was a little thing in the chat that I wanted to address that somebody posted on the chat. There was a question about IU, and if they apply test optional on November 1, can you later submit test scores? That's that other layer we were talking about, and knowing what test optional means at each school. For IU, they are being flexible in that they will let you, if you start test optional and you take a November test and you just do awesome on that test, that student can say, now I want to give you my test scores. So they are being flexible with changing back and forth. And when I was talking to my friend from Ball State this weekend, they've always been, once you're test optional, you have to stay test optional. They are actually becoming flexible with that as well. So it's very, very important to, like I said, take that extra layer of research and make sure you understand what test optional is at each school.
And another popular school that we have a lot of students apply to certainly is Purdue University, and they are another one that's got a little unique spin on it this year, and they're really asking the students to be ethical. And if they have a test score, they're asking them to report that. And so we are encouraging students to do that. And again, I think if we keep in mind what that is utilized for, it truly at Purdue is amazing with the number of applicants they get. They review every student holistically, and the goal is to admit a student that they feel will be successful in their program. And certainly the last thing in the world they would want, and probably we parents would want, and the students would be admitted without having a test score and then find out they're not successful. And had they shared that test score, they might have encouraged that student to consider a different major and help them, guide them in that decision. So Purdue University asked for the test score to be reported, and they also allow you to submit on Purdue's application your first major choice. They'll evaluate you for that standard. And if you don't make that, if you listed a second major choice, they'll look at the student and make a decision for that. So that's a nice option with Purdue. They really admit by major. Every major has a little bit different standard and different evaluation process they utilize. So having that two choices available, and then if the student has taken a test score, they're asking them to report that. An important note on the common application though, under the general questions in the common application, ask the students if they want to self-report their test scores. If a student says yes, it then asks them what are the tests and what are the scores. They then, if they enter those scores on their Common App main page, those scores will go to every college that they submit their common application to. So our recommendation has been pretty much with that question on the Common App, where it says, do you wish to self-report your test scores, to say no. And then if an individual college asks for test scores, they might have that supplemental question on their individual college on the Common App website, or a student could send their test scores separately from the College Board or ACT directly to that admission office, and they would review that in their application. But if they put it on the Common App as a self-report, all colleges will have access to that information, and the student may not want to have that happen. So just an important point that I've caught a couple of students weren't clear on how to fill that out.
And we just have a few minutes left. I see one new question popped up. It's very specific about if you're unsure of a major but interested in a program that has additional requirements like art. Do you have advice on going undecided for declaring a program? And this was an anonymous attendee, but I would encourage that parent to have their student talk with their counselor to see what the best opportunity, depends on the school, depends on the major and the requirements, if there's a portfolio, things like that. So that's a super specific question. That is why we want to meet with students and talk through these details, because it could be a different answer depending on the student and the school and their situation.
And it's also this year, I think the college admissions staffs are very used to talking online with students and answering questions. So it's another great way for the student to ask that college that specific question. As good as we are, and Ms. Pavanka is amazing, you know, we're going to get questions about thousands of colleges, and knowing all the ins and outs, it's going to be hard for us to know all those answers, but certainly that college rep that will be reviewing their application and knows all their majors is a great resource for our students. So we can help them find that reference for the admission counselor that serves our school, and maybe ask that question in an email, and maybe set up a separate a video conference with that person if they needed to.
Okay, yeah. I'm going to jump one more that was on the chat real quick, and then we'll have to call it a night. What if Cent scores were low in their junior year and now they want to go test optional? Most schools, if you indicate test optional on their section of the application and say you're declaring test optional, then they will not look at that test score. Even though you've sent it, they will not use it in the consideration. And most of them are pretty upfront saying that. And then I'm going to do one last one that popped up. The CSS profile and the FAFSA. The FAFSA is the federal financial aid form. The CSS profile is required by some private schools as a means to get some additional information to package that student more holistically. They may ask for a little more financial information. Usually the purpose of that is to help provide more financial aid versus to provide less. They want to get more information to see if they can help that student out. The CSS profile is available on the College Board website, and not all schools will require it. So that's a piece of research to make sure. Don't pay to fill it out because it does. That one costs money. The free federal financial aid form does not. Obviously, the free word in there should dictate that, but definitely look and see if your schools require that or not. But it's usually to try to benefit the student versus hurt the student. And with that, it's 1 minute until the first presidential debate for those of you that have an interest in watching that. Some of us might want the synopsis later if it's too painful to watch on either side. But we wanted to make sure we're respectful of your time so that if you do have other things this evening that you would like to get to, that we are respectful of that. As always, please, please, please email your counselor, have your students pop in and ask questions. We are definitely on the same team and want to provide opportunities for your student. Any last words from the panelists? Okay. Ms. Watko and I are going to get rid of our office backgrounds here in a minute and go home. So we were wanting the internet to work. So thanks so much, all of you. And we hope you have a great evening, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Watch the number go down.